department, which is led by the acting DG, Dr. Whittle.
Good afternoon, Chairperson.
We are having a second meeting in one day, which is not usual, but what can we do? Can you then do a roll call, Llewellyn?
Thank you, Chairperson. We have yourself, Honourable Gaba. I have Honourable Aduans. I have Honourable Siwela. I have Honourable Morasetla, Honourable Nodada, Honourable Mashabela, and Honourable Dr. Tembekwaya present. The apology still stands for Honourable CBC. And I know that Honourable Sukus will be joining us shortly. Thanks, Chair.
All right. Thank you very much, Llewellyn. Members, on the agenda, we are having the briefing on the annual report 2020-2021 of the department. That's the only item we are having today. Can I allow then an adoption for the agenda?
Chairperson?
Yes.
I move for the adoption of the agenda.
Thank you very much, Honorable Suwela. Any seconder?
My hand is up, Chair.
Yes,
No,
Mr. Muratel.
I rise to second. I've shifted away from the constituency office.
Recording in progress.
No, you are very clear now.
Travel in para.
Than the morning. Okay. In the absence of the ministry, both the minister and the deputy minister, can I hand over to you, Dr. Whittle?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairperson, and good afternoon to you again, and good afternoon to the members of the committee. Also to all the colleagues that have joined us. Just to indicate, Chairperson, that we're bringing the annual report for 2020-2021. Of course, this was the COVID year that we're talking about. We've had several lockdowns during this period. I'm going to ask the acting DDG for Business Intelligence to lead in terms of the presentation, and then hand over to the CFO to deal with the financials. So over to you, Carol.
Thank you, DG. Acting DDG is Mr. Mpanza this month, but I will continue to make the presentation. Thank you. So the presentation really is in two parts, as DG mentioned. And this part on performance information is the one that I will deal with in relation to the planned performance for 2020-21. Next slide. And as mentioned, to back up that planned performance is also the expenditure for the financial year, as well as touching on the Auditor General's report in the year. Next slide. So we're looking at 5 program areas: administration, curriculum, teacher development, human resources, and institutional development, covering school management and school governance, planning, information, and assessment. That includes the infrastructure mandate, amongst others, as well as EMIS. And then program 5, looking at educational and enrichment services, including health, welfare, and social cohesion. So the annual status for bar for indicators this year, like we normally do, we compare with the last financial year. And I want to draw attention of the honorable members to the following issues: that we had many more targets, 69 targets in the year under review, 2020-21, as opposed to 43 targets and indicators in the year before. So we had a lot more indicators and a lot more delivery points in relation to the work that we do. In terms of achievement, we had 80% achievement, but that represents 55 out of the 69 indicators that we're responsible for, as opposed to the previous year, we only had 43 indicators and we had achievement of 37 of those. So there's been an increase in the output indicators, but also increase in the activities that we have done under the years under review. We've also had less targets and indicators not achieved in the year under the review, 2 instead of the 3 that we had. And similarly, in terms of partial achievement, we've got those figures there. Next slide, please. So we had, this just confirms the indicator status there. Thank you. Next slide. So this is just another way of representing the information I've just provided. And we're looking really at a lot of firstly, the fact that the majority of our indicators are annual indicators in the period under review. We're also looking at the areas of partial achievement, and you will see that the partial achievement areas and the areas where we didn't achieve are really highly correlated with the areas around the COVID response, and also the delay of some of our activities because of the lockdown that the DG mentioned earlier in introducing the presentation. So in terms of the service delivery environment and context, we had a global pandemic acknowledged in health, social, psychosocial, economic, and educational circles, school closures, which we are only now getting a sense of the impact on in terms of learning losses, and reversing really some of the educational gains that have been made by children and by countries in relation to in the education and training field, amongst others. So we have a lot of impact on young children, particularly girls, who are at increased risk of vulnerability, and had to do a lot of work around that socially, in terms of violence and pregnancy. But we've also had school closures that have interrupted school-based services, including academic feeding and nutrition ones. So the WHO is very clear about the impact of the pandemic. Next slide, please. And that really sums up the service delivery environment. The normal service delivery environment under education looks at the Education Policy Act, and also the development frameworks that seek to support the DBE's statutory role, formulating policy norms and standards, monitoring and oversight of policy implementation, and leading the provision of socioeconomic rights, including basic education. Next slide, please. And that is something that underpins the work that we do, in spite of the fact that we also have the global pandemic to worry about. So as we have mentioned before, we're looking at the National Development Plan, the 5 years medium-term strategic framework, and how that then translates through the action plan for the sector into what we do as the department and its partners, but also how those are then translated into annual plans. And it is this annual plan for 2020-21 that I'll be reporting on. Next slide, please. We have 5 outcomes that speak to school readiness, learners enrolled in publicly funded schools who read for meaning and comprehension. We have an outcome, strategic outcome, related to youth being prepared for better further studies in the world of work beyond grade 9. And we have an outcome relating to school preparedness of young people leaving the schooling system who are able to contribute to a prosperous and equitable South Africa. And finally, a school physical infrastructure and environment that inspires learners to learn and teachers to teach. And that's just about the supportiveness of the schooling environment. We have the action plan with goals, 27 goals, which speak to what we want to do in improving learning outcomes and how we intend to get there. And those really speak to the kinds of activities that we have in the Department of Basic Education, which is where this particular APP, where the annual report is reporting on the plans, but also the sector, what we intend to contribute in terms of the sector outcomes towards 2024 and 2030 in terms of the NDP. Next slide, please. So the key highlights of this period, and we include the information on the previous year, is really about the number of full-time and part-time candidates who wrote the NSC. The fact that the overall pass rate, though it declined in terms of the previous calendar year, was not as large as one would expect, considering all the things that the young children had to go through, the system had to go through, and the preparations that had to be made to make the NSC happen. We had a record number of workbooks printed and delivered to schools, providing access to materials, as well as placement rates for Funza Lushaka graduates who were placed in schools, 82% of them as opposed to 81% in the previous year. Next slide, please. We also had 18,000 young and qualified educators appointed in the year under review, and 117 schools monitored, in addition to what the provinces monitor by the Department of Basic Education. We had 13,085 Funza Lushaka bursaries, which were awarded to students for initial teacher education by the end of March 2021, and we exceeded our target by 585 because of lower than average than expected price increases in the cost of the studies. We also hosted various lehotla. We hosted lehotla under the theme of equipping learners for knowledge and skills for a changing world, focusing on 21st century skills and fourth industrial revolution skills and training. But also, in addition, the DBE has hosted a basic education sector lehotla annually to engage the sector on key deliverables and strategies towards improving the quality of basic education. All of these in support of the NDP and sustainable development goals. So the deliberations really reflected on challenges, refocusing efforts towards emerging priorities, interventions, and improving educational outcomes in different ways. Next slide, please. We also have oversight visits, the DG led to various Saturday classes, spring classes around the country to support the class of 2020, visits to marking centers from December to January to monitor and support marking for the 2020 class on the National Senior Certificate. 184 of those marking centers were visited by the DG. Pre-standardization meetings with chief markers and internal moderators of 9 provinces to prepare for standardization with Umalusi, as well as monitoring of 164 sanitation projects throughout the country, focusing on Eastern Cape, KZN, and Limpopo to accelerate the eradication of inappropriate and unsafe sanitation facilities between February and March of 2021. Next slide, please. So in relation to program performance, then we're looking at those 5 programs, and starting with program 1, which deals with admin. We had targets related to paying invoices within 30 days, and our achievement is as indicated, and it's green in relation to the work that we've done in making sure that that happens. Next slide, please. We've also achievements in relation to the reports on misconduct cases and the number of capacity building programs offered to the DBE officials. Were able to exceed these numbers a lot of the time because of the fact that these were not being held face-to-face, but offered digitally as well. So there was a lot of movement in that area in the branch. We submitted the statutory reports and plans as required within the time for quarterly reports and the annual performance plan. Next slide, as well as the annual report in the year under review. We had senior management posts which were filled, and strategic planning and reporting deliverables which were tabled and retabled. So we had 2 sets of tabling within the year, and normally we would have only 1 set of tabling for 2 documents. We actually tabled 4 documents in the year under review. We also assisted Umalusi and SACE to revise their strategic plans as well, and those were also retabled within the year under review. Next slide, please. This is just the detail of this. I've mentioned that we've done a lot of work around engaging with branches, but also with partners around the priorities within the department. And this slide just confirms the dates and of tabling, but also the responsible oversight reporting bodies. And you can see the number of institutional reporting obligations we have. In terms of research, we have work that we've been doing with different partners, but also across the department and with provinces on early grade reading interventions, which work, the reading support program. We had an impact evaluation started with 2 pilots. And we've also done extensive work around benchmarking African languages, reading competencies for the foundation phase, starting with Nguni languages and expanding to other languages in the 2021 financial year. We finally received the 2019 General Household Survey data, and that work was completed in the next financial year. And the report is being finalized currently as we speak. We have a COVID-19 research repository. It's compiled and it's been released, and we'll keep adding to it in the years that come. That was compiled for between April and August 2020. Next slide, please. In terms of GTO, we had the corporate governance of the ICT policy framework completed and signed off, and non-active contracts being vetted and re-examined, as well as SLAs finalized for 26 SLAs are active, and National Treasury's approval was obtained to continue with the CETA contract, and the rest of SLAs are being finalized. So a lot of work around making sure that the IT infrastructure and the IT arrangements support the remote learning and hybrid learning, as well as remote management, data collection, monitoring, and oversight, as well as the other work that we do with provinces and within the department. The work around mobilization of society and advocacy of society around a lot of the curriculum and educational interventions over the period was also mobilized through the QLTC, engaging with provinces, and also SACE contributed to some of this work in relation to the inclusion of the campaigns for undocumented learners within DSD, Home Affairs in the Northwest Province. Next slide, please. We had various international exchanges of information, various meetings between the minister, different embassies and the department, and as well as the DBE delegation, which met with the Ministry of Education of Eswatini to discuss cooperation to assist Eswatini learners to obtain the NSC as agreed by the department. So these meetings were held over the period of review. Next slide, please. Then we also formalized 10 partnership agreements, international partnership agreements, and partnerships on sustainable education programs with various partners, the New Africa Foundation, Unilever, SASO, the Motsepe Foundation, Tirisano's Construction Fund, as well as with Avbob Tiger Brands. And you can see the number of schools which benefited, 3,252 from all these, accommodating around just over 2 million learners and 25,000, just under 26,000 teachers. So the estimated monetary value of these partnerships amounted to 64 million over the period under review. Next slide, please. In terms of parliamentary and business process, we had 389 questions for the year under review, and the majority of those were from the National Assembly, 108 were from the NCOP, and they were the breakdown by quarter is on this slide. Next slide, please. We had also, in addition to some intergovernmental and technical support work in relation to different donations from the USAID, donations of tanks worth about $1 million by the Republic of China. And then the DBE coordinated the signing of memoranda of understanding with SASOL on sanitizer donations to 4 provinces. So a lot of work around donations, partnerships around the responses to the COVID pandemic directly in terms of non-pharmaceutical interventions, but also around education and training interventions to combat and to deal with, to respond to the crisis, if you like, educationally. We had monitoring of the Education Employment Initiative project, provincial visits from the 10th to the 19th of November. The Director General monitored Saturday schools, spring classes, as I mentioned, that's the breakdown. Infrastructure and ACD monitoring, there's a breakdown there on that slide, as well as the monitoring of marking centers. So that's the detail, if you like, of the visits, the provinces, the dates, and the oversight visits. In terms of institutional mechanisms of engagement within interprovincial, within a cluster, but also in terms of HEDCOM and CAM, we have those scheduled meetings, the meetings held. You can see the number of unscheduled meetings exceeded the number of scheduled meetings. And you can just see that the intensity, if you like, of the meetings that were being held as the response, the educational response was unfolding within the sector and within the department. So the high level of engagement across the sector in responding to the pandemic and also in setting the system back up for coming out of the pandemic. In terms of internal audit, we had 5 audit committee meetings which were held. We had various documentation related to risk and internal auditing assurance services were carried out. And we have the dates for all these available. The audit committee was inducted in May 2010. Microsoft Teams, all branches presented their priorities and mandates to the new audit committee and were able to coordinate an audit action plan workshop with the relevant infrastructure and implementing agents for infrastructure to improve and address some of the AGSA findings in the management reports previously. Next slide, please. In terms of communications and research, we had 1,866 resources uploaded on the DBE website, 192 articles, and 17 editions of the DBE newsletter. We had various media advisories as regulations and guidance was being released. We had a lot of engagement around media advisories, messaging, and communication support on the work of the department, both here within the department, but also with sister government departments and with other stakeholders. So media statements, a total of 54 media statements were developed, and interviews and media queries, 351 media interviews and queries were dealt with in relation to the issues of the sector. Next slide, please. So program 2, curriculum implementation, a lot of the indicators in program 3 relate to, we have seen before in previous years, but quite a few of them were new in that they were reporting on what's happening in the sector. So quite a lot of annual national reports in the sector, because the Department of Basic Education, National Department, it does that. It's the lead of what is happening within the sector, within the 9 provinces, leading policy, standards, and oversight. So we had technical schools monitored for implementation of CAPS. This, of course, all of these are in addition to what provinces do we had 18. There were no deviations there. Next slide, please. We had learners obtaining subject passes towards an NSC. We planned for 60,000. We actually had 63, just 63 more than that. We were able to do a lot of work around supporting learners through 4 platforms: face-to-face, broadcast, online, and direct provision of study materials, even right through the different interventions, broadcasts that the department used. Was a matric programs on different channels through DSTV and also the DBE TV, channel 122 on OpenView, amongst others. The department also increased the distribution of its online study materials through partnerships and through existing partners. So hard copies as well as electronic copies were used to really support learners. We had also planned to touch the 3,527 learners with profound intellectual disabilities using the CLPID program. And because of COVID restrictions, closing special care centers, some learners actually stayed at home even when the care centers were eventually allowed to open and to operate, were not able to get to a lot of these learners. And so we found that our actual achievement was 3,423, and we're not able to get to those learners to assess them. And we're now using this online tracking tool to monitor and support PEDs to ensure that they in turn support learners to participate. But the COVID restrictions, especially for learners with profound intellectual disabilities, we found was really problematic in terms of just getting to the learners that we had targeted. So our deviation for the planned target was -104. Next slide, please. In that respect, we have a national report on monitoring the implementation of the CIAS as a mechanism for early identification and intervention. Next slide, please. We had also work to do around amending the legislation to regulate the new ECD landscape. Our planned target was the joint submission for the ECD function shift. The diagnostic report was approved, and our actual achievement was that we deviated because the proclamation was not finalized by the end of the financial year due to certain delays in signing the proclamation. But the president eventually signed the proclamation on the 30th of June. So that allowed for the finalization of the submission then for determination, and a joint submission was submitted on the 21st of July. So 3 months after we had planned and targeted in relation to what we actually achieved. Next slide, please. We also managed to develop a report on ECD funding models, and we had signed, by the end of the financial year, we had signed an MOU with partners to carry out the census, and had delays in appointing a service provider for the census pilot, which only started then in June 2021. So that's just after the end of the financial year. So that pilot has evolved into a proper, the pilot report was conducted, but that now went into a full-blown ECD survey, a census survey, which is underway now and actually in the last stages. Next slide, please. So we developed a report on the ECD service delivery model and its workforce implications. We had 8 districts monitored on the implementation of NCS for grades 10 to 12. We also monitored 3 provinces on extra support classes to increase the number of learners achieving high-level passes, bachelor passes. Next slide, please, as we targeted in our APPs. We had a number of schools, indicator related to the number of schools monitored for implementing compulsory entrepreneurship education. We had targeted 90. We actually had the achievement of 86. And the negative deviation was as a result of 4. The delay in starting the monitoring of schools due to COVID-19 lockdowns, but also due to, and we started the data collection process in September, between September and 10th of March, instead delayed from May 2020. So we had planned for May 2020, but when we did that plan, there was no COVID in sight. There was no COVID pandemic in sight. And so the consequence that was that in some provinces, the target of 10 was not achieved, as we show in the provincial breakdown. And in some, it was surpassed. So in order to correct this, we've conducted an M&E workshop to plan for the next financial year, and to ensure that we have to mediate the challenge of COVID-19 and plan accordingly, ensure that we have earlier collection of data and improve engagements with provinces and districts on how they plan to carry out oversight and achieve and capacitate field workers and achieve the targets that they set for the year. Next slide, please. The annual sector report on the GEC was one of the targets for the year under review, and we actually achieved the approved annual sector report on the implementation of the GEC. Although the GEC has not been implemented, there is an implementation. There's the report on the implementation process so far. So the pilot did not take place in 2021 because of the disruptions in schooling and low school attendance in some cases amongst grade 9 learners, especially in the initial, the higher levels of lockdown. And the pilot now has been scheduled for the 3rd and 4th school terms of 2021 and will be consolidated from 9 PED reports. So the work around that has started and we are anticipating, aiming to get a much more refined report on the GEC by the end of this financial year. There is an approved annual sector report on schools of skill that pilots the technical occupational stream, dated 2020-21. Even though we had some delays in relation to PED reports, and all reports were submitted to the AGSA by July 2021. Next slide, please. We have several examples of monitoring on the implementation of various norms, policies, reading the policy, the implementation of the incremental introduction to African languages, the early grade reading assessment, as well as the multi-grade classes, which are monitored for implementing the multi-grade toolkit. We had planned 10, and we actually achieved what we planned in the year under review. Some of the monitoring we had to do remotely, but we managed to be able to really achieve what we had planned for the year. Next slide, please. In addition, we had the annual sector reports on the implementation of the National Reading Plan. Next slide, please. I'm going to go very quickly now to just the yellows. Next slide, please. Yeah. We had annual sector reports on schools for the availability of readers, so by province. Next slide. We also had annual sector reports in relation, and then we had schools monitored per province for the utilization of ICT resources. We had 27 per province, and we achieved 27. In terms of the provision of home language workbooks in grades 1 to 6, we had 100%, and we achieved 100%. And you can see it for 17,000 schools, we had 17,000. Percentage of public schools provided with mass workbooks for grades 1 to 9, we had 100% target, and we achieved that. Workbooks for grade R, we also had the 100% target, and we achieved that. Next slide, please. The annual sector report on EFAL learners provided with maths and EFAL textbooks in grade 3, 6, and 9. We have a report. We had to chase up late submissions, but we were able to finalize this annual sector report and provide information on this. We also had the number of schools monitored for home languages. and in which lesson plans have been developed for terms 1 to 4. We had 10 of those. We monitored them, and we had no deviation. We achieved what we said we would. Next slide, please. And then special schools with access to electronic devices. We had 140 that we had planned. We achieved 145. We were able to do this because we had the mobile network operators who were able to help to fund this, were able to assist with the department with this. So the number of schools provided exceeded the DB target by 5. Next slide, please. We had, again, the approved annual sector report on the number of teachers trained on inclusion and the number of learners in public special schools. We had annual sector reports on those. The reason they are yellow is because we had delays in provision of information, provincial reports from provinces, 1 or 2 provinces, and we've indicated there. The DBE had written to the PEDs requesting them to submit reports on specific dates, but in spite of this, we were not able to get those reports by the dates that we were supposed to. And but although with the majority of these reports, we actually got them after the date. So the reason that it's yellow is because of that. Next slide, please. We know that these yellows will change to greens in the current financial year. Then we undertook to provide approved annual sector reports on the percentage of public schools serving as resource centers. We provided, had a report, draft report. 4 PED reports had to be chased up. They were submitted, but after the date by which they were required, and the DBE had written to them to requesting them to submit the data, the information on specific dates. So this year, that work has started much earlier to make sure that people do submit when they're supposed to. Annual sector reports produced on the establishment of focus schools per provincial education department. We had that target, and we achieved it. Next slide. So in this program, we have work on content development and distribution in terms of ICTs, especially in grades 10 to 12. Business studies, we had work that related to development and digitizing materials. We had the Basic Education Employment Initiative e-cadres, 10,951 were appointed through the work of the branch. We monitored the implementation of CAPS for technical schools for occupational subjects. LTSM for occupational subjects were 90% completed, and the MST grant was monitored in all 9 provinces in terms of MST. Next slide, please. We had workbooks. We had the Interprovincial Rural Education Committee meetings convened. We had work around reading, school reading, primary school reading improvement program in collaboration with the NECT, training of foundation and intermediate subject advisors, teachers, SMT members, and a Reading Champions program. Reading Champions totaling just over 23,000 were placed in schools across the province as part of the BEI initiative. Next slide, please. And this just shows the breakdown of workbooks. I will go to the next slide, please. So that's workbook. This is for volume 2. The previous slide was for volume 1. Next slide, please. And then this is really the detail of the work on ECD practitioners, this function shift, the legislative arrangements around that, the proclamation translations, the drafting, ring fencing of posts, the work on reporting to portfolio committees, but also the agreements in terms of the MOUs between the 2 departments. This on top, obviously on top of what was happening and unfolding within the education sector in a very, very unusual set of context and very, very difficult pandemic unfolding across the world, but also within the country and the continent. Next slide, please. And the detail really in relation to curriculum training, creative writing study guides, still had work around developing grade 10 to 12 literature study guides, was a matric broadcast support, video lessons were evaluated, curriculum coverage and implementation was monitored in relation to providing extra tuition and work around just revising and trimming the curriculum, developing evidence-based reports to present to Umalusi as part of the 2020 standardization process for the NSC, amongst others. Next slide, please. And I've spoken a lot about the desktop monitoring. I've spoken about the remote learning, remote monitoring, the annual teaching plans, which were part of the curriculum recovery plan, were developed for all subjects and grades, and they were aligned with the school calendar, as the school calendar also was being reviewed. Risk-adjusted subject plans were developed for the intermediate and senior phase. Project-based learning activities were also developed for the visual arts, life skills, life orientation, creative arts, and teacher and learner guides developed. In terms of ICTs, we have spoken about these. In addition, developed guidelines for schools with the following categories of learners: blind and low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, autistic learners, and guidelines for health and social service professions working within the basic education sector during the context of COVID, because these are professionals who work with us in ensuring that our learners are accommodated. Second Chance program, I spoke about the support of Second Chance learners at 133 face-to-face centers and various platforms, as well as creating opportunities, job opportunities for 415 unemployed youth who were contracted to help with screening and cleaning and to help with SOPs during, before, and after classes at each center. Next slide, please. Program 3 looks at teachers, education, human resources, and institutional development. We had aimed and targeted to ensure that 90% of SGBs meet the minimum criteria, and we had 96% according to a survey of 1,000 sample schools. We had targeted 100% of sample schools with a minimum set of management documents at required standard. We reached that target. Funza Lushaka, as I mentioned earlier, we exceeded by 585 bursaries. Next slide, please. We had 4 quarterly reports on the Funza Lushaka graduate placement, and also on schools where allocated teaching posts are all filled. So there was no deviation in that respect. Next slide, please. We had targeted to have an annual sector report on the number of qualified teachers aged 30 and below entering the public service as teachers. And we had some reports that we were able to provide, but we had 2 provinces where the figures were different between the province and the national report, and those figures have since been corrected. The reason is yellow is because those were corrected after the time that they were supposed to by the provinces in consultation with the provinces responsible. A national report on teacher development institutes and teacher development centers was also developed and approved. Next slide, please, as targeted. And similarly on teacher development, the implementation of teacher development programs by PEDs with a focus on EFAL, maths, physical science, and accounting. So that was our target. We achieved that. And next slide, please. We also had 9 provinces as targeted whose post-provisioning processes were assessed for compliance. And we had an annual net sector report on grade R practitioners with NQF level 6 and above qualification. And that annual sector report is available and has been approved. Next slide, please. We had 9 provinces as targeted, monitored on the IQMS, 9 provinces as targeted, monitored on the implementation of the PMDS for the Education Management Service. Next slide, please. And the detail of those education performance management and development and whole school evaluation efforts is in this slide. Next slide, please. These next slides just look at the detail, number of reports, the actual numbers of permanent, temporary relief appointments. The content of the reports is summarized in these next slides. Next slides, please. And that slide just shows the breakdown of placement as of December 2020 of Funza Lushaka graduates. We have updated this since then. Similarly, the number of percentage of schools where allocated posts are filled. We have also similarly updated this. In terms of ELRC work, we have a protocol document between the SACE and on managing educator conduct. We've got agreement of the disciplinary code and procedures and professional ethics applicable to educators. We also have various DBE circulars to provide guidance on procedures to be followed when educators and learners return to schools, just to alleviate anxiety and to improve psychosocial health amongst educators and education workers, staff, learners, and even parents, actually, as the country was experiencing rising COVID infections. Next slide, please. We had various addenda to circulars related to COVID. Next slide, please. And also guidelines for school governing bodies around COVID, around the elections, the 2021 school governing body elections to respond to COVID protocols. Electronic versions were also developed. Electronic elections were also introduced for the first time. And SGP elections commenced on 1st of March and launched by Minister of Basic Education. Next slide, please. I've mentioned the subject advisor training, online training program with 3 modules was designed to assist with professional learning committees at school, and 7 provinces were exposed to a virtual refresher session. We had 7,900 BRRR practitioners with NQF level 6 and above qualification. Next slide, please. And identified teacher needs through various tools that were developed by the department. In terms of curriculum research, the monitoring that I spoke about, teacher development, teacher resource centers, and on their functionality was produced. The DBE collaborated with VVOB to develop a continuing professional teacher development impact assessment tool, and work was done to improve teacher digital skills through using the teacher centers. Next slide, please. So lots of work and guidance to teachers on how to use online and remote learning, amongst others. Teacher development implementation, the DBE with NECT and XENEX profiled subject advisors to better understand their roles, responsibilities, and professional development needs and experiences. A quantitative picture was developed, and training of MST advisors, economics and accounting learners. Training of MSc advisors was implemented. In terms of the number of schools and learners offering accounting and economics at the NSC level, the anecdotal evidence indicates that this is on the decline, and the DBE conducted virtual training programs for teachers in accounting, and over 400 teachers in accounting and 400 teachers in economics to counteract this. Next slide, please. There's various teacher development orientations, trainings that have been detailed on this slide. I'll go next. Next slide, please. In terms of Program 4, Planning, Information and Assessment, we had targeted 24 new schools to be built and completed through a CD. We exceeded that by 8. Next slide, please. In terms of the sanitation facilities, we planned 600 and our actual achievement was 298. And we had really more than 300 of the additional sanitation projects, which we could not complete because a lot of the construction firms actually just ceased during lockdown. They were ceased operating. So we had to then find ways once the lockdown levels had reduced, we had to find ways of now being able to address that cessation of service provision. That's the one thing. And the second thing is we had disruption by business forums as well as poor performing service providers. So all of these sort of really in combination combines to contribute to this underperformance. We are in terms of the increased focus on alternative building technologies. We also had legal challenges from role players in the industry, causing a further delay in implementation. So, in order to mitigate against these in future, we've really worked on increased focus on alternative technologies to speed up delivery, better strengthened oversight, simplified design specification, as well as limiting the number of schools allocated per contractor in the time since the lockdowns have been reduced. The levels have been reduced, and also supplementing this by weekly visits to construction sites by the program support unit, regular visits by the DG, weekly meetings with implementing agents, and executive management of implementing agents, as well as a weekly progress reporting to the Minister's office. So all of these things in combination will ensure that in the current financial year, we will overcome a lot of these delays that were brought by COVID, amongst others. We had targeted 100 water facilities, schools provided with water facilities through ASIDI. We achieved 101. Emergency water supply, we targeted 3,000. We achieved 3,216. 1,300 we targeted for schools served with emergency sanitation. We achieved 1,303, due mainly to the requirement, the additional need that was posed by provinces as a result of COVID requirements. Next slide, please. We had targeted 500 test items for the new GET qualification developed in language and maths. We achieved that. We had 4 NSC reports that we produced, and the number of question papers we set for June and November examinations, we had targeted 292. We only achieved 145 because we had merged the 2 examinations, the June 2020 and the November 2020, into one. So 145 question papers for the June 2020 were used for the merged examination in November 2020. And given the merge, that target was not achieved. And that really was something that was out of our control. In relation to the schools using SASAMs, we had 98%, we planned for 98%, and we had 98.6% that we had. So we achieved that. A national report on lyrics. We also got that approved national report on the provinces that are implementing lyrics. Next slide, please. And also national reports on the national assessment framework, and also a national report on operationalizing a school readiness assessment system. So we have those 2 national reports which are approved and available. Next slide, please. Number of officials from districts that achieved below the national benchmark in the NSC participating in mentoring program. We targeted 33, we achieved 37. So we had 37 people mentored on team building, leadership, and the analysis of results to help them to make evidence-based decisions at district level. Next slide, please. We had targeted 75% of school principals rating the support services of districts as being satisfactory. Our actual achievement was 57.2%. We had various data collection issues, especially in relation to over the COVID period, in relation to just completeness. We had data collected with various links, both hard copy electronic surveys, but also Google links. And so in future, and we think that some of that contributed to confusion within among school principals, but also given the COVID context, we were not able to really, school principals were not necessarily comfortable, if you like, with all these different platforms. And so going forward, we're going to be really during the school readiness visits in February, early in the year, in the academic year, we're going to be really completing forms and helping principals through this process. We're also going to ensure that the circuits and the districts are involved. That wasn't necessarily the case, especially during lockdown. And therefore, we're really going to have a better data collection and data management arrangement because the pandemic is not as it was during the lockdown. The district directors that have undergone a competency assessment prior to their appointment, we targeted for 95% and we achieved 100%. The administration is now mandatory. In terms of underperforming schools monitored at least twice a year by district officials for support purposes, we targeted 75%. We achieved 13.8%. Schools were visited. The deviation is minus 61%, and we give the numbers there that we managed to get to 371 schools out of the 2,325 that we had targeted. They were visited, but some were visited during the first term of 2020, which falls really outside, some of which fell outside of the 2020-21 financial year. Due to school closures, some primary schools were not visited, and provinces that were hit by the pandemic, for instance, the Eastern Cape, actually issued notes that prohibited visits to schools so as to contain the virus, but also to reduce transmission. So really, in relation to monitoring, it was really a tough ask to have this done in this time because of the concerns around transmission during the and especially transmission in different provinces at different times over the period of the pandemic. So what we will do this year and the years to come is to revise the technical indicator description to specify that visits will be done per academic year and not per financial year, so that we will make sure that the monitoring plans are aligned with the academic year. Next slide, please. We had 3 district director forums held, and we had 61. We had targeted for 55 districts in which teacher development was conducted as per district improvement plan. Actual achievement was 61. We had +6 deviation, but we also had district improvement plans which were not signed by district directors. So 14 did not indicate whether they had teacher development plans or not. However, most districts have indicated that they do value the teacher development support, and they will include those in their district improvement plans in future. In terms of the public examinations, I believe that the Portfolio Committee, honorable members, have received the report on the public examinations for 2020-21. And so I will go through to the next slide. Next slide, please. In terms of donor grant management, conditional grants, performance evaluation of the conditional grants was conducted at over 300 schools located across all provincial departments. And we had those different conditional grants and an annual performance evaluation report submitted to the National Treasury by 31st of July in compliance with the DORA. Next slide, please. And this is the work that was done in terms of EMIS, the modernization of the South African Schools Administration Management System. SA SAMS, all the detail around SA SAMS. Next slide, please. But also the development of this Health Connect app, which was provided to schools and zero-rated, really to principals to monitor and report the number of new COVID cases. So that's an innovation that was developed and used in the education system to help during the time of COVID. In terms of district level planning and implementation support, I've spoken about the satisfaction surveys, strengthening of circuit management, a series of meetings, and the DG conducting provincial cluster meetings in May to appraise all in the sector of the risk-adjusted strategy and approach to COVID response. Next slide, please. We had various self-assessments and various district development planning supports, functionality and effectiveness interventions, which are on this slide. Next slide, please. Amongst others, the headcom, subcoms, and ministers' meetings with the districts I've mentioned, competency assessments. Next slide, please. Mentorship. Next slide, please. And then in terms of school and district incident management support, various work around calendars over the year in terms of amendments and publication in gazettes, sourcing consultation with key partners, proposals, submissions, and approval of the calendar over the year. So there's quite a lot of activity around that in relation to the dates for opening and for closing over the year, as we are aware. In relation to school readiness monitoring, we had school readiness monitoring in June, in July, and in August, and 1,491 schools in 8 out of 9 provinces were visited. School readiness monitoring also in February 2021, and schools were generally found to be ready for the 2021 academic year. And that was in major part to all the interactions and engagements that happened in the year, in the calendar year before. In terms of call center, we had 5,300, just under 5,300 calls received through the toll-free line, and all were resolved. Next slide, please. In relation to NIDU's work, we had 3 focus areas, and we had a DBE COVID provincial oversight report, reporting on measures that schools were taking to mitigate and contain the spread of COVID. We had a report on a survey about the effects of COVID on functionality of schooling amidst the pandemic, and the improvement in terms of the improvement of the quality of DBE home language workbooks. We had an in-depth analysis of the DBE workbooks in Sepedi, Sizulu, Xhosa, and English. So that was really about analyzing errors, etc., within the workbooks and helping to feed into the materials development process going forward. In program 5, looks at education and enrichment program services. Next slide. So we had 117 schools monitored for provision of nutritious meals. Next slide, please. We had HIV/AIDS provinces which provided business plans for the HIV/AIDS grant. We had schools monitored on the National School Safety Framework. We planned 43. We actually achieved 43. In relation to stakeholders reached through social cohesion programs, we planned for 7,500. We actually had 3,745 that were confirmed in terms of the audit. But we had a lot of participation. But we were not able to actually get the participants on some remote platforms, for instance. They wouldn't necessarily identify themselves by their names, so we were not able to actually sort of pick up names, but they would have acronyms, for instance, and it's not easy to, that information really didn't meet audit standards. So there was quite a lot more that we actually had participating in social cohesion programs, but only 3,700 of those met audit standards. So we've strengthened the indicator description, but also systems for ensuring that when people participate on electronic platforms, for instance, we're able to capture them fairly easily through either pre-registration processes or registration during the call. I think that detail is there. I think we had a lot of Childline providing psychosocial support, the NECT assisting. We had monitoring visits and HIV/AIDS. Thank you. HIV/AIDS and life skill grant framework was approved. Standard operating procedures were developed, revised, uploaded, and also downloaded by a lot of within the country by, for instance, independent schools, but also other countries outside the country, other countries in the region, to help with their own responses to COVID. The health promotion program managed to deworm just under 85,000 learners, and a total of 268,000 learners were reached through the routine health screening, HPV and diphtheria and TD vaccine drive by December 2020. 59,714 girl learners were reached through the program for adolescent girls and young women, and staff recruitment for government-to-government agreements implementation was completed in March 2021. Next slide, please. In terms of safety, I've mentioned the monitoring visits. Disaster risk management was high on the agenda of the safety colleagues in relation to just building a strong foundation of the management of safety in schools by school management, but also school personnel more generally. In relation to school and enrichment in education, the Stedford partnership with the Cape Town Opera resulted in the development of a 13-module e-learning material that will be used to guide performers, learners, and conductors. And then the co-curricular and enrichment policy is nearing finalization with inputs from stakeholders and incorporation into the draft. Next slide, please. The extremely important gender-based prevention work has been implemented as online training. 2 jamborees were held in Sidibeng and in the Northern Cape, in Gauteng and the Northern Cape, sorry. We also had a distribution of slimline constitution booklets in partnership with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, and work around the girls and boys education movement in partnership with UNICEF. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. I think I'll hand over to the chairperson, the CFO, for the rest of the presentation. Thank
you. Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon, chairperson and members of the committee, as well as the acting DG. I'll deal with the finances. I just want to apologize at the beginning of the presentations. I was struggling with network connection, so I may have disturbed the proceedings. For last year, our budget was 23.3 billion, and we spent 22.9 billion, which is 97.9% of the budget. And this slide shows the breakdown of the budget and expenditure per program. If we can go to the next slide. The reason for not spending the whole budget is that on administration, we had an issue of the non-filling of posts, or the slow filling of posts, because we had a moratorium while we were still revising the organizational structure. And as well, during most of the reasons for most of the underspending is due to the fact that for the bulk of the financial year, starting from March to, say, December, the COVID lockdown, especially lockdown level 5 and 4, and a bit of level 3, meant that there was very little activity, if any, such that there was the spending did not happen as it was supposed to be. The same applies to the rest, except for the fact that with curriculum policy support and monitoring, which is program 2, there was a withholding of the last tranche of payment for the learners with profound disability grant to KZN due to non-compliance regarding reporting on the expenditure and progress. And then for teachers, the underspending was due to the fact that on an annual basis, we pay a fee to UNESCO, membership fee to UNESCO, which is calculated on the rand-dollar exchange. And the the exact payment depends on the exchange rate on the day of payment. So whereas at the beginning of the year, we will budget a certain amount, there will be a variance one way or the other, depending on what the exchange rate is on the day of payment. And then for planning, program 4 is basically the school infrastructure backlogs grant. As most of us know that there was no construction work during the hard lockdown, so that affected the spending, and the building industry had ground to a halt. On education enrichment services, this is also due to the fact that some external projects that we used to hold outside, we had to be halted, and that then had an effect on the budget. If we can go to the next slide. The next slide is the same expenditure, budget and expenditure. Just that on this slide, we're showing it per economic classification. If we can go to the next slide. This slide gives the same explanations of underspending as I've spoken to. We can go to the next slide. This slide shows the breakdown of budget and expenditure for conditional grants. Most of the conditional grants spent at 100%, except for learners. As I said, we withheld the last payment to KZN due to non-compliance. Next slide. Yeah, that's the explanation for KZN. Next slide, please. And then the next part is on the AG report. For the first time in 4 years, we've managed to move out of a qualified audit report or audit outcome to an unqualified audit outcome. There were two matters of emphasis. The one was the restatement of corresponding figures. What normally happens is that when audit is done or when financials are done, it happens invariably that you pick up that in the previous year, there were figures that were not stated as they should have been. And then at the time that one does financials, there's an opportunity to restate those figures. So that's that first matter of emphasis. The second matter of emphasis is the fact that our irregular expenditure for the year increased by 3.2 billion. And then because it's a material increase, the AG put it there. But what they've also gone and done on that report is to say, out of that 3.2 billion, 2.7 billion of it related to previous financial years. Maybe let me explain it this way. In the 2019-2020 financial year, when we got our last qualification, one of the qualification point that the AG had raised was that they could not rely on the irregular expenditure figures that we had disclosed for the 2019-2020 year. And they could not rely on it because they could not see what processes we had followed to make sure that the figures were complete, to ensure completeness. So what we did now in the 2020-2021 year, we went out to implementing agents because they've always been our Achilles heel. We went out to implementing agents and collated the irregular expenditure that was sitting with them. And in that process, we picked up 3.2 billion, close to 3.2 billion, because a small part is just internal procurement. And what we picked up in this 3.2 billion, the 2.7 billion of that related to irregular expenditure, which the implementing agents had not been disclosing in the previous years. So we want to emphasize this because when somebody sees a jump of 3.2, somebody may think that in 1 year we spent 3.2 irregularly, but we are just saying it goes back some years. It's only about 400 million that out of the 3.2 million billion that related to the 2020-2021 year. Then the last part of the audit report is actually on the performance audit. The AG selected one program, the curriculum program for audit, and they did not find any material challenges with it. Thank you, Chair. I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
Chairperson, she's back.
Oh no, I thought Dr. Whittle was gonna say something, but it's fine. Members, that's the presentation of the department for the annual report 2020-2021. Can I note hands? I have noted Nodada, Siwela, Dr. Tembekwayo, Litsia. In that order?
Chair, sorry, man, I'm just swapping devices quickly. Can somebody just go before me? I'm just swapping devices because of connectivity.
Okay, Honorable Siwela.
Chairperson, thank you for the opportunity and good evening to the colleagues. Well, let me take this opportunity and welcome the presentation by the Department of Education. Of course, there is a number of good achievements. However, my concern, Chair, is on the continued disruption of construction activities, especially on the sanitation by the business forums. And this problem seems to persist. And what therefore I would like to know, probably from the department, since these things will be with us for a long time, and COVID also do not help matters, what is the department going to do to try and mitigate on the demands of the business forums that continue to disrupt the building or construction activities, which of course in the end contribute to unachieved targets? The second point that I would want to raise is also with regard, well, I hear that the department is building schools, and which is quite good. However, Chair, what is happening to the schools that have been destroyed by storms? To date in Bushbuckridge, in particular, there are these schools that have been blown away. It's almost a year now. And seemingly there is nothing that is being done to rebuild the schools. Could it be the reason that those schools were not budgeted for? Of course, yes, because no one would budget for storm damage. However, Chair, it will be important for the department, and including the PEDs, to try and rebuild the schools, because the failure, in my view, lowers the morals of the educators and the learners in those schools, that ultimately will lead to poor performance by those learners in their exams. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Nota back.
I think I'm back, Chair. Chair, am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much for the presentations, Chair. I actually have quite a mouthful to say on this report, and quite a few questions to ask. First of all, it's quite concerning in specific areas, and I think the previous member just spoke to it. But I'll ask the questions when it gets there. One of my big concerns, Chair, and I think maybe a guidance moving forward, is that we need to get a matrix in which the department uses to set some of these targets. And maybe they should take us into confidence when they do deliver the APPs as to how do they set certain targets to say, you know what, we're going to look at 19, schools, to see whether they're implementing the entrepreneurship program or, X amount of schools for coding and so on. And what maybe necessarily informs that, that they set a specific target, for example, of 19 or 60,000 for learners that need to pass their subjects in the NSC. So that we verify the impact of that on the ground. Because when you set targets as a department, we need to see them tangibly impacting people's lives for the better on the ground. And I think, when I read through the report, and I think it's maybe getting to grasp how, the full system works, that it's something that we need to consider quite extensively. And I think it will help us moving forward. And that's just a comment that's by the way. One, I just wanted to check that there is no report that indicates how many teachers have been absorbed within the system that are aged between 30 and below. And when do we, anticipate that this report will be available, considering the shortage of staff within the department and, the need for teachers, and in particular in the high unemployment crisis that we actually face in the country? That's my first question. Secondly, there's an indication of about 17.8. I don't know whether it's a percentage or it's a number of principals that are dissatisfied or not satisfied by the support that they get from the districts. Is it possible to get a full breakdown of which districts or which areas in which these principals are located in terms of circuits or districts? And the department indicating to us as to what are the reasons for that have been cited by these principals that indicate that they're not necessarily satisfied by the support that they get from the districts, and what interventions are going to be made to ensure that those particular districts or circuits that have been identified actually do better. There's also an indication of that, the CFO just spoke now about, the irregular expenditure being at 3.2 billion, but of that 2.7 and some odd is, from previous financial years. And, doing calculation based on in that simple maths, there's over 412 million that has been irregularly spent in this year. And there's a citation that this is because of implementing agents and due to infrastructure projects that are underway. Now, I've raised this thing in numerous meetings before, and I asked whether is there any consequence management from implementing agents that inflate the costs of projects that need to be done, especially things like eradicating pit toilets and building schools that have dilapidated infrastructure such as mud and asbestos, which are major projects that we need to deal with as a department. Now, if you find implementing agents that are not able to do that type of work, and in fact inflate the prices in a budget that is already shrinking, what consequences have been put in place? Can the department indicate, are there any implementing agents that have been found guilty of this type of irregular expenditure? Have they been blacklisted? If not being blacklisted, what consequence management has been put in place, or what interventions are being put in place to ensure that we don't deal with the situation before again? And the reason why I say this is because you've got a school, for example, like Vezinfundo in Mpumalanga, that was built for 36 million rand on a wetland, chairperson, and there's no consequence management implemented for that particular implementing agent. Yet you've got a school in Stegstrom that is built for 20 million and is a high-level ICT school, meaning that there is an inflation of prices in building schools in the public sector. And at the end of the day, it is the learners that require those infrastructure facilities that suffer at the expense of business people that don't necessarily care about making sure that we actually utilize public funds efficiently, and they end up benefiting from these irregular expenditures. So I want to really pin on this thing on the department as to what consequence managements have been put in place. Are people being blacklisted when they contribute to irregular expenditure? And the officials that are responsible for that oversight, what has happened to them? Because the AG report indicates that there is nothing that is being done. So I really would like to be taken into confidence in this particular issue. Thirdly, Chair, there's also linked to that, CFO, a 6.9 million that has been lost due to interest of invoices not being paid in 30 days. Now, officials are obviously responsible for processing that. What has been the challenges on not processing those things on time, and what consequences have been put in place for officials that don't process those things in time? Because I can tell you now, 6.9 million can definitely be used elsewhere, even eradicating just one pit toilet, to making sure that learners don't drown on those things. So I just, this thing of not being able to efficiently comply with our very own targets that actually at the end of the day compromise the small budget that is shrinking of the department is really, really challenging. So that's my third question, Chair. And then, Chair, going into the ACD program, the last ACD report published was for 2018 that we see on the website for the Department of Basic Education. Where can we access that ACD report, and when will it be published on the site and made available to us as well? In Program 2, there's a large deviation with regards to numbers of learners with disabilities using the LPID. And the deviation is at minus 104%, and COVID was used as as an excuse or a reason, if I want to put it that way. So, what plans are in place to ensure that the support that includes disabled learners in this time of COVID, especially where special care centers are required to close, because it seems as if learners are even more vulnerable during lockdowns with less support provided to them. And how will DBE improve remote support to these learners to ensure that they are not left behind, especially now that there's been a deviation on this point? And my last 2 points, Chair. In slide 74, like I've indicated, part of my first question is that there seems to be a major shortage of teachers with posts being filled only sitting at 57%. Are there, and there's a moratorium in terms of this, but what plans are in place to ensure that this shortage is addressed, because it does have an adverse effect on the ground? The Minister of Basic Education, of Higher Education, now having removed education degrees from the SASA list, that means that these programs will need to be funded. But there's a critical need for these professions. So is DBE working with DHEAD to address the shortage? What is the plan regarding it moving forward, considering that there's that particular shortage? I think, Chair, that's basically it from my side. But I do want to re-emphasize, or maybe do question the department. If you, for example, you say number of learners obtaining subject passes towards the NSC is 60,000 as an example, that's your target for the year. What informs that target? Is it informed, just a random number that you think that you can be able to achieve? But is there maybe, some philosophy or rationale behind that? If, for example, you're saying that we've identified 90 schools that need to be monitored, for a specific target, what does necessarily inform that, and how do you break it down to make sure that there's actually tangible impact on the ground with these targets? It is commendable that some targets have been achieved, and I think it would be amiss for me not to say that. But I think my concerns are some of these areas that have been consistently, bothering me personally. And the department indicates that there are reports that are at 100%. Is there linked evidence of increased learner performance in the classroom regarding these targets that you've set that are now at 100%? I think that's that, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Honorable Dr. Tembekwayo.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentation made this afternoon. The inquiry into the ACD report and irregular expenditure has been mentioned, so I'm not going to say more on this aspect. But I would like to ask the department to make further inquiries on what I'm going to report now, which is very much disturbing. I found it disturbing yesterday when I made an oversight because the community asked me to intervene in that particular school. The school's name is Botlhavatsatsi Primary School in Mamelodi. On my arrival there, I found the principal's car being washed by one of the EAs, I mean the education assistants who started as at last week, including the general school assistants. And that was disturbing. And all of them were busy cleaning, scrapping, cleaning the toilets. They were even asked to bring knives that they could use to remove the dirt from the floors and everything without gloves, picking up papers and so on. And I feel it's a contravention towards the overall purpose of that particular job. Because one of the job description is to support the teachers who teach reading, and reading is part and parcel of the program 2 of the curriculum, inclusive of conducting oral reading fluency. And to report to the department to say to date, not even a single EA or was paid to the educator at the school, which means they never even entered the classroom. What they were doing was just doing the overall cleaning. And what disturbed most was that two of the screeners are teaching. They are used as educators in classrooms, while the SMT members who are educators, who are friends to the principal, don't even go to the class. So they are screeners. They don't do any screening job. You find the security people doing that. It's definitely disturbing, and it contravenes the job description as it is there. But something that is, disturbing also is that the whole foundation section is forced to take Afrikaans as a subject, excluding their mother tongue, the mother tongue of the immediate environment to the school. And the teachers who are teaching Afrikaans do not know Afrikaans. They also don't have books that they are using, but it's being forced to be done at school. It's a problem, and that's why the community asked for an intervention. So the worst part of it is that the husband to the principal is an IDSO in Silverton, which is an area where the principal is subscribing to. And she's also boastful about that, to say no one will be able to can touch her because of her husband's affiliation to the Department of Education as it is, including the SGB serving at that school. So what I would like to ask the department is, please, can you establish people who can go and look into this particular school so that they can bring about a conducive atmosphere of learning to all that are employed there? And if possible, also interview some educators at the school, because there is a lot that is being experienced in that particular school. And please feel free to engage with me on this particular matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Itzi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and again, good day to the officials from the department and honorable members and everybody who's on the platform. I think let me thank the department for their presentation. I think maybe let me go straight to Let me start with the CFO. I see that there are a lot of targets which we did not reach, and I do not want to go to all of them from all programs actually. But when you look at the financial implications, we've spent about 97% or so of the budget. Does it, or the programs we did not meet, all of them combined, do they amount to the 3% of the budget or so that is left, or that is left in the coffers, or we overcommitted on some of the targets in terms of financial commitments, and on post not filled. So it was one of the targets we did not reach financially. Well, I'd received on my email, I'm not sure if all honorable members received the same, an email from teachers from the Free State who alleged that they qualified through PGCE qualification, which is an NQF level 7. But in the Free State, they are struggling to find employment because allegedly in the Free State, the department there has passed a policy position that bars them from employing those who have qualified for teaching through this PGCE qualification. Is that the case? And if that is the case, why is that the case? Well, there are a lot of allegations on that email, Chair, where they're claiming that those who are, connected in that space do get posts at the department, but them who may not be politically connected, they struggle to get employment in that space. Maybe, if possible, if they don't have this data now, they can just give it to us maybe within 7 days in writing, Chair. In the Free State, if they can check on the foundation and primary space, how many vacant positions do we have in that province of the Free State? How many vacancies do we have in that space in the Free State? And if some of those were budgeted for this past financial year we're dealing with, and maybe the reasons as well, if they were funded for, why were they not filled within the period in question? And on program 4, it looks like there was a slide. It looks like there was very poor monitoring for underperforming schools. I think just less than half of the schools you're targeted for were reached. And the reasons that were given in that slide were that schools were closed and all of that. But I think when you put a target, you also take into consideration the fact that schools will be closed. And I think in the financial year, the 1 year we did have a lot of unforeseen school closures, but maybe take us through what were the consequence management processes that were entered into by the department with these district officials who were supposed to visit those schools and did not visit. Because if a school is underperforming, really it needs serious attention. It needs serious support from the district. And if the district fails to monitor them, visit them, check what is it that they're doing, we're likely to get them being repeat offenders, because they may think it's business as usual. And I want to implore the department on the department that maybe put in stricter measures, especially on these poor performing schools. If it means your district officials must be stationed daily, obviously we know they've got other responsibilities in their jobs, but if it means at least in a week, two days of every week, they must be on site visiting these schools. Let it be so, because it means they will continue being repeat offenders, and they're not going to improve. Also on program 4, Chairperson, I see that the department had targets for and they had committed funds. Was it infrastructure grant or something? The conditional grants for HIV and AIDS plus life skills. And I wanted to ask if out of those, maybe in that part of life skills, have you also paid attention to this thing of child pregnancy? As we saw earlier on this year, that in the first quarter of this year, we had a lot of kids between the ages of 10 to 19 who fell pregnant. In fact, in all provinces, we're above 25% of the total number of those who fell pregnant last year. Do you, by life skills, are you attending to that part? And if yes or if no, whatever, also take us through what is it that in this financial year we're doing differently to try and attend to this thing of child pregnancies. Maybe, Chair, if we're thinking about putting in social workers to assist teachers in these schools to deal specifically with such issues. So we know the wide range of issues that contributes to the societal problem. It's not necessarily a school problem, but I think because these are our constituencies, the kids, we might want to try and do something. So I wanted to ask Chairperson if there is something different that the department is trying to come up with, so that we don't get the next year, we don't get to see the high number of these cases moving forward. And I think other questions on the infrastructure were covered by both Honorable Sewell and Honorable Nodada. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Honorable Sukers.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you very much. Chair, I am just in Umtata here in the Eastern Cape, so I'll keep my video off. Firstly, Chair, thank you to the department for their presentation. If the Chair will indulge me, I have a few broad areas on which I have questions. In order to just respect everybody's time, I will follow up with questions in writing for the more detailed questions. I firstly want to start with legislation. The annual report does not mention that the BRRR bill has been substantially delayed and was already under discussion by this committee in the 5th Parliament. Of course, not our committee, but the 5th Parliament committee. I just want to know, where is the BRRR bill now, and what is the timeline for tabling it in Parliament? How are the BRRR bill and the second Children's Amendment bill being coordinated? And just for interest, I am currently in the public hearings for the Children's Amendment bill. So then I also just want to raise a second area, and that is to do with stakeholder relations. I trust that when we are presented with a BRRR bill, it will not need substantial adjustment by the committee. I want to know, does this bill have support of all stakeholders? And the committee has
We can hardly hear you. You are breaking. Honorable Tsukers?
Yes, Chair.
We can hardly hear you. You are breaking.
I am, like I said, Chair, I don't know. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Can you try? Yeah, can you try again?
Okay. If it continues, Chair, can I send you my questions?
Yes, you can send them, or rather you can write them here on these Zoom messages here. But let's see how it goes now. Can you try?
I will try. I'll go ahead. It's too many questions, Chair. Then if it continues and it is a problem for the meeting, then I will send it to the department and ask, together with what has been asked by my previous colleague, that we receive answers within 7 days. But I'll proceed for now. I was talking about stakeholder engagement, who is serving on the second CAB task team, who are the ECD providers represented, and in what numbers are parents and NGOs presented. We've heard throughout the year the committee about stakeholders, including unions, SGBs, NGOs, and members of the public, that the DBE engagement process needs substantial strengthening. This perception that the DBE engages mainly to impose, there is this perception that they engage mainly to impose their view on stakeholders. My question is, do you have a stakeholder process that identifies interested and affected parties, that guides interaction with them and measures how they perceive the engagement? If so, can we see it? And if not, can it be developed? While interaction with the committee is not strictly a stakeholder issue, as the representatives of the people, we are a key stakeholder. The report does not mention the difficulties, of course, that we've had in receiving answers to our questions. Where you interact with stakeholders, the only way, and I'm going back to, I know this is something that I have brought up several times, again on the point of research, and I must say thank you to the department that it featured within their presentation. What is concerning, though, is that the post of Business Intelligence DDG is vacant. And that is it's concerning basically because of the critical aspect of research and data. I see no research has been concluded in the last year on bullying, school dropout, the impact on ECD for the move to DBE, learner pregnancy, home education, new educational modalities like online schooling that has now grown because of COVID. We need to understand these phenomena and not just get the numbers. Can Dr. Whittle, in the absence of the DG, assure us that this will receive priority? And lastly, Chair, my second theme is around Dr. Whittle is heading the delegation, so I will directly ask him questions on CSE. When we finally received the final report on the evaluation of impact of school-based sexuality and HIV education prevention activity, we read the following. Few outcomes from this study demonstrate that the revised SLP life orientation program had a positive impact on HIV prevention and related behaviors. In other words, the program has failed. This is not mentioned in the report. So is the DBE willing to listen to stakeholders on this matter so we can effectively tackle the learner pregnancy crisis? The DBE does not consider government priority to economic transformation and job creation as a priority. I saw the one line around entrepreneurship and the challenge with that. The problems, for instance, that we have currently, I'm sitting in darkness, we have with electricity supply education can be a growing economic sector if the DBE sees its role as an enabler of the independent sector. And I make this comment and I will detail it in my written questions. I would like to hear what the DBE's attitude is to playing this role. Chair, and then lastly, I just want to say I welcome the annual report and the work of the department in its sector. This year has presented many challenges. We look forward to working with the department to drive innovation in this sector. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Honorable Notary, your hand is up. What is going on? Oh,
No, Chair. No, Chair. I wanted to abuse you with one question that I had forgotten to ask, if I'm allowed, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just on program 1, Chair. There was 1 million donated from the Chinese government towards water tankers. Can you just get an indication of how many water tankers have been installed?
We're losing you.
Current... Am I breaking, Chair?
Hello. Proceed.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying on program 1, Chair, there was 1 million that was donated from the Chinese government to go towards water tankers. So I wanted to check how many water tankers have been installed and are they currently functional from this donation, if they can maybe update us on that. I think it's the only thing that I forgot to clear. Thanks.
Okay. No, I think members have covered most of the issues at length. There are just few things that I would be raising from my side. First, to just make a comment that says that in terms of the departmental targets, you are in this financial year at 80%, whilst in the previous financial year you were at 86%. But it is understandable. Actually, we are dealing with the year that was a COVID year, as was alluded to by Dr. Whittle. But I must comment as well, and I would want you to speak on this matter. Because according to your presentation, under program 4, you have planned to build 24 schools and you achieved 32, which means that you have overachieved 8 schools. And the fact that it is 8 schools that you have overachieved, but that you did in a COVID year, where actually we were all at home, we were not working. So what is it that you did right? What is it that you managed to get right whilst we were on COVID? And that makes you not to be able to overachieve. Imagine if the department can overachieve building schools every year. Would probably be in a better situation. And then the other questions that I am having is under program 1. There is an under expenditure of 18 million, and yet there are vacancies that needs to be filled by the department. It's 18 million which you returned. Why did you not fill these vacancies? But also, I don't know whether it's me who was hearing wrongly. In this meeting, you are referring to each other mostly, to many of you as acting DDG, as acting what, except for the acting DG that we know it's because of the DG that is out of the country. Why are posts not filled by the department which are vacant? The third question is with regards to the transfer that was not made to the KZN Department of Education to learners with profound disabilities. What was the reason for that? Why was the payment not transferred to the KZN department? I must say that I am congratulating you for moving from a qualified audit opinion to an unqualified audit opinion. But the Auditor General has raised a concern, or rather has said that you need to put in place a team of professional accountants that have the ability to prepare financial statements. Actually, what he has raised is that you cannot you cannot prepare financial statements as the Department of Basic Education, and he has then advised that you need to put a professional team that can do that. Did that happen, or it did not happen? And then the last thing that I want to raise from my side is that because of COVID, the department has lost many teachers, and that then results to the shortage of teachers, which created many vacancies in the department. What is it that the department has done to try and get those teachers back in terms of recruitment or anyhow? How are you recovering in getting those teachers back as the department? But from my side, I think the manner in which you have handled your finances, but also the manner in which you have tried to achieve your targets, I missed the fact that it was a lockdown year. It was a COVID year where most of us did not actually know how to deal with it in the initial stages of it. I think the department has tried really to make sure that you still deliver to our people, you still deliver to South Africans. So those are the issues from my side, really, that I think I have noticed and I would have wanted to raise. So be that as it may, then I'll hand over to the acting DG, Dr. Whittle, to lead the answering of questions, and then you will then delegate to other officials. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much to the members for all of the questions. I think what I'm going to try and do is to group some of these around the themes that have emerged, Chairperson, and ask that we deal with those ones first, and then ask some of the DDGs to deal with some of the specifics. So perhaps where we should start is with Mr. van der Westhuizen around all of the issues of infrastructure. We'll then deal with the matters related to finances, including irregular expenditure, and then ask Ms. Mola if she could speak to some of the consequence management issues. So Chair, if that is in order, we'll start like that, and then I'll invite some of the other DDGs to deal with the more specific questions. So Mr. van der Westhuizen.
Good afternoon, Chair, and greetings to all the honourable members in the committee. I would respond to some of the issues raised around the infrastructure. I think the Chair towards the end made a comment about overachievement. We are proud to say that we've achieved 32 new schools in a very difficult year. And I think part of the answer of why we could do that, but we couldn't do it on sanitation, is what we found on the lockdown is that the lockdown severely impacted the small contractors, where those contractors appointed for the building of schools are the higher graded CIDB contractors, level 8, 9. They could survive the cash flow challenges where the small contractors really battled. So what we have there is that in Q1 there was basically no activities. In Q2 there was some activity started, still not sure. The regulations also prohibited people from moving across provincial borders. So a lot of the workforce was not at the place where the work must happen. So that was really difficult. And again, the bigger contractors managed to bridge those challenges much more effectively than small contractors. So we had to put a lot of measures in place to really assist small contractors. So we focused on more regular payments. In some instances, we paid them twice a month, sort of every second week you can submit. We assisted them with direct payments to service providers and to suppliers just to get material back on track. What we also picked up is that the whole industry was grinding to a halt during lockdown. And when we opened up, there was a severe shortage of building materials. We ran out of cement in the country. We also ran out of roof sheeting in the country. And that had a major impact also on getting the momentum going again. What we also need to take into account is that nobody planned to have a COVID emergency water supply program to 3,000 schools or a COVID emergency sanitation program to over 1,000 schools. That was not part of our planning. That was sneaked in, and we had to fit it and make it work. And luckily we succeeded in doing that. But where we suffered is with the small contractors on both water supply and sanitation. On water supply, we made it, I think, in the last week, we put the post to achieve the 101 versus the 100 target. But on sanitation, we battled. There was a comment about the business forums. This is an absolutely critical thing that we need to address much wider than just the construction industry. We had incidents where people were shot on site. We had incidents where people were held hostage. We had several threats. We had incidents where people were forced to make some monetary payments in order to let the project proceed. The way that we are trying to mitigate that, just from a construction point of view, is to have a very transparent tender process, and also to stimulate the local economy as far as we can, and having minimum requirements of local subcontracting and dealing with and trying to create opportunities for local players in that market. There was a comment about the irregular expenditure. I think the CFO has explained that what we have disclosed in the financial statements is not for last year. This is for the entire 10 years of a CD. And it was a very focused effort to clean out any non-disclosures, to really focus on clean governance and coming out with anything that it just smells not to be right, we disclosed it. And those are in different categories. What we found is that we have an implementing agent like the Mvula Trust, which is not a state entity, who followed their own procurement policies. But because they acted as an agent for us, the AG insisted that they must follow state procurement policies, and sometimes there was a misalignment. That misalignment was declared as irregular. So it's not like the money got lost. The money was implemented properly, and we built close on 300 new schools, over 1,000 water projects, 1,000 sanitation projects, electricity to 300. So the money was well utilized. But in the disclosures, we focused to open them up. And moving forward, we have initiated now also new actions to expand that into the SAFE program. We also are in the process of procuring specialists on state procurement and accounting to assist us in that thing. We are focused on maintaining this clean audit, the unqualified audit opinion, and even to improve on that. There was a comment on or a question on the Chinese water tanks that was in the Northern Cape. And Chair, if you will allow us, I will get from the Northern Cape colleagues the list of the specific schools where those tanks were installed and what is the status of that installation. There was also a reference to storm damaged schools in, I think, Bushbuck Ridge. We will engage with the province to get the name of the school to find out what exactly the status there. There was a school in Mpumalanga mentioned where the school was built in a wetland. I'm aware of one school in the Delmas area that was built in an area that is subject to some marshy conditions. We are aware of that. We've reported that to the Minister previously. If that is the school the Honourable Member is referring to, we can provide that details as well. I think those are all the questions that I noted related to infrastructure, Chair. Dr. Whittle, if there's anything else that you have that you would like me to respond to?
Yes, David, there was a question about how we deal with storm damaged schools. And there was another one very specific on the CD 2018 report and when the member could have access to that.
Okay, on the storm damage, I picked it up. That was in Bushbuck Ridge, where the specific question was a school that got damaged there. I asked that we just engage with the province to get the details of that. I don't want to guess that and give them the real answer. On the ACD report, we are reporting to various forums on a regular basis, be it the Office of the Ministry, we're reporting to the Presidency, we're reporting to other interested parties on a regular basis. I think what the Honourable Member referred to is we had a resource under the Project Support Unit that assisted communications, and they from time to time published some data on a CD on the website, and we can then take that up. Unfortunately, that contract has lapsed, and we can take that up with communications, and then we can put some updated information on the website. That shouldn't be a problem. Thank you, Chair. I think the last comment was in terms of consequence management. We are constantly driving this issue. There was a comment about inflated costs. We really try to monitor that carefully. We had a recent incident where an implementing agent reported an expenditure which we could not verify. We eventually issued a letter of demand, and we recovered every cent of the disputed amount. We are currently also working with another implementing agent where we did not agree with their reported figures, and we are scrutinizing that in detail to make sure that there's value for money before we report any of those. So that's a constant effort that we're doing. And in any incidents where there are fruitless and wasteful expenditure, there was a comment about default interest for late payments. Those issues are referred to the investigations committee, and the CFO and his team can respond on what is happening with those issues where they take it down to the bottom. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David. The last one is the Honourable Nodada's
recording in progress
question around the Chinese 1 million rand.
The Chinese I reported, Chair, is in the Northern Cape. They made a donation of the tanks. They made a donation of R1 million for tanks. The Northern Cape Provincial Department then implemented the installation of those tanks. So I will engage with the colleagues in the province and get the names of the exact schools where they were implemented and what is the status of those.
Okay, no, thank you very much, David. I hope that we've covered all of the infrastructure-related questions. CFO?
Thanks, Dr. Whittle. I'll start with the question on the spending of 97% of the budget, leaving about 3% unspent, whilst we're saying that some of the targets were not met. I must just indicate as per, I'm not sure what is the number of the slide. I think it's slide 11, 6, where we're showing the breakdown of the budget per economic classification. That budget of 23 billion, 23.394 billion. Out of that budget, 19 billion or 83% of that budget is transfers and subsidies, which is money that we transfer to provinces for different conditional grants. So that whole transfers and subsidies money has been spent in terms of, as we showed in that slide. So already 100% of the 83% of the budget has been spent by that transfer. So that leaves us out of the 23 billion, it just leaves us with just below 4 billion, 3.9 billion to be exact. And that 3.9 billion is made of various things like compensation of employees, goods and services, all those things. And out of that 3.9 billion, we spent 3.4 billion, which is 88%. So basically for the non-transfers and subsidies budget, we've underspent by 12%. So that's where the non-achievement of targets come in. So basically it would be a bit of a distortion if one looks strictly at the budget and says, because we've spent 97%, because some of the spending happens regardless. For example, one of the spending that happens is the transfer of money to the 100% transfer of funds for Funza Lushaka bursaries. So I'm just indicating that on the face of it, it may seem as if there's a misalignment between underperformance on targets versus the high performance on the budget. Then the next one that I want to talk to is the issue of the BRRR bill. The question from Honorable Sukers related to progress on the BRRR bill. We just want to report, Chairperson, that the progress is that at today's budget, at today's cabinet committee meeting, the BRRR bill was presented. The Deputy Minister presented it on behalf of the department. The cabinet committee raised a few issues which they've asked us to go back and look at and come back within a week. And when we come back within a week, the presentation is no more going to be at the cabinet committee meeting, but it's going to be at cabinet. So that's how far we are with the BRRR bill. And depending on what type of questions come up at cabinet next week, then we should be ready to present to Parliament, depending on, as I say, what else has to be done between the cabinet meeting of next week and going forward. With regards to the children's amendment bill, which is the other question that came from Honorable Sukers, there has been amendments, yes, to the children amendment bill. What has happened is that there's been a task team, what one could call a big task team of various departments, various stakeholders, social development, SALGA, COCTA, and other departments to look at the amendments that have to happen. Out of that big task team, then there was a smaller team that was put together to do the drafting, so that once the drafting of the amendments have happened, they could present to the bigger task team. And that presentation to the bigger task team is happening this Friday on the 12th of November. Once that has happened, then there would be presentations back to internal stakeholders, because internal stakeholders are the headcom within the department, the MINMAC, which we call the CEM within the department, and then flowing from that, then we can go back to Parliament, because It was already at Parliament. The big challenge, I must indicate, which may affect the speed at which the bill is finalized, is the fact that the ECD is now coming over to the basic education sector with effect from April next year. And because of that timing difference, the fact that ECD is now still sitting on social development, and come 1st of April, it will be sitting in a different department, different cluster. There's a struggle as to which cluster basically should own this. So chances are that the amendments will move more with speed after the 1st of April, when it is certain that now ECD is sitting the ECD function is sitting with the basic education sector or department. The other question that came up, because Ms. Mola from investigations will deal with consequence management. The last question that came up from the chairperson is the comment that the AG has recommended that we must put together, we must actually appoint a service provider to prepare financials, and whether that has happened. I must just correct, Chairperson, that the AG never actually said that, because one must remember that the AG never put their heads on the block as to one way of doing things one way or the other, because they wouldn't want to be seen to be dictating to a department in case they are blamed later on to be overreaching. The body that made that recommendation is the Audit Committee, and they made that recommendation in October 2019, when we were still in the middle of getting qualified audit outcomes. I think in October 2019, we had just gotten the second qualification. And delays have happened in the appointment of the service provider. But what has happened, those delays are actually a blessing in disguise, Chair, because subsequently we've managed to show that we could actually do financials ourselves within the department without help from a service provider. We've actually, from the finance side, we've never believed that the qualification happened because there was any problem in the preparation of financial statements. We've always said it's not the case. The reason why we kept on getting qualifications is because the department, as a department, we were failing to hold implementing agents accountable. If one looks at the last three qualifications, in all the cases without fail, the issues are because of implementing agents. It's not because somebody sitting within finance cannot do financials. And by the way, in 2018-19, we actually had a service provider who came in to assist with financials, and we still got the qualifications. And I think years before there was such a situation, that was before my time. So it's never been an issue of officials not being able to prepare financials, because then why have them and employ a service provider to do what they should be doing? But the positive actually coming from the AG is that some two weeks back, Chairperson, we had a meeting with the AG where we were taking stock of the previous audit, the one that has just happened 2021, and preparing for the 2022 audit. And the AG commended us. They said exactly what the chair is saying, to say, in the middle of COVID, you guys in the department managed to move out of a qualification, and you did it such that we, as the AG, were able to finalize our audit, our management report, our report a few days before deadline, whereas other departments out there actually asked for an extension. So we were we are commended. They even went as far as saying, you look, the way you ran the audit, the way you ran the RFIs, the COMAFs, keep it up, do it the same way. They also said they commend the way the DG, by his posture, demonstrated he really wanted to improve the audit outcome. So we don't believe, Chair, that it was the right call for the audit committee then 2 years back to say we need an audit firm, and I don't think there's still room for an audit firm to be appointed. Thanks, Dr. Whittle.
Thank you very much, CFO. Emily, if you can deal with the consequence management component. Ms. Mola.
Thank you, DG, and thank you, Chair and Honorable Chair and honorable members. In terms of the irregular expenditure, the question was also whether there is any consequence management from DBE officials in terms of investigations we have conducted. Yes, there were consequence management in terms of progressive disciplinary process that DG and the HR process followed. And also in terms of the implementing agent, DG would write to the CEOs of the implementing agent to request them to provide reports in terms of the consequence, but over and above also what Mr. van der Westhuizen has indicated in terms of instances where we pick very significant and discrepancies and interventions are done in terms of recovering. Some might take time. One implementing agent, I remember, I think 2019, the department stopped to allocate projects as part of the consequence management. The issue of blacklisting, that one has not, it hasn't been done in terms of blacklisting, in terms of National Treasury for like service providers which are blacklisted by National Treasury not to be awarded business, because implementing agents we use mostly they are public entities like IDT and DPSA. So what the department did was to stop allocating more projects. I think also Mr. van der Westhuizen covered some of the areas in terms of others where recoveries, we are doing recoveries in terms of losses we incur. Some cases we are still busy investigation, like the 6.9 million the member has indicated in terms of the interest on late payment of invoices. We are currently with that investigation. It's at the final stage where we're getting comments from various stakeholders. But also with that transaction, there was also a court process where the service provider that was appointed as consultant in terms of overseeing number of projects in Eastern Cape, there was a court case in terms of their appointment. So that also complicated the issue in terms of the work that they've already started, which was from stage 1 to stage 4. But once we finalize the investigation to get comments from all stakeholders involved in the process, then we'll finalize in terms of the liability. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Ms. Mola. Chair, if we can then move on to some of the other issues. Mr. Pareachi, if you could deal with all of the issues around HR and the sector.
Thank you, Dr. Whittle. Good evening to the Honorable Chair. Good evening to honorable members. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Honorable Dr. Tembekwaya for raising the issue related to the education assistance. I didn't catch the name of the school. If it could be just please put on the chat, and then we could start some of the investigations after this meeting, but we will come back to you for further details as well. And at another occasion, we'll share progress in terms of that program of the education assistance and how we're dealing with any misbehavior in that regard. The Honorable Ndoda raised the issue of the report dealing with educators younger than 30. There is a report, and we will provide that to the Secretary to circulate to the members. And then the third issue which I'm basically combining because a number of members have raised the issue of shortages of teachers. And I'll probably dwell on it for a little while. Basically, I think we were at the committee earlier in the year that we do work with the Department of Higher Education, and they had put out a study with researchers from the department, from the University of Stellenbosch. And the Funza Lushaka is one source that provides educators who graduate. Although we have about 13,000 in the pipeline, only 4,000 graduate are in their final year, and basically they are the ones that graduate. But in the system itself, through HEIs, over 30,000 young educators graduate each year. On average, it's around 28,000. The issue there is most often would be that sometimes you cannot find in certain subjects the required specialization, but there is a supply of educators, and we also do have an unemployed educator database, both at the DBE and each of the provincial departments do keep their own database as well. When there's instances they need to find educators. Now, that doesn't mean that in terms of the fourth industrial revolution and the subjects required for that, we do meet the match there. That's an area which we are targeting currently. Now, as the acting DG had indicated, this was a COVID year, and two things happened from an HR perspective. There were two adjustment budgets that were conducted in the financial year. And in the first instance, around June, there was a cut on the compensation of employees, and that was due to some aspect of funding the COVID essentials that which were required at the time. And then there was the second in November, again, there were cuts to certain, and some provinces were more severely affected than others. In fact, the one that faces the biggest challenge is KwaZulu-Natal. Now, we did not see the crisis emerge because when we returned to school, our major concern was that we had the issues related to comorbidities and teachers not coming back to school. But then all grades didn't return in June at the same time. And thereafter, when we went towards August, September, there was rotational timetabling. And so we didn't see the full impact if we had a normal year as such, if these budgetary cuts were put into effect. Because according to the post-provisioning norms, what you provide out and MEC puts out, which should be funded, and that should then ensure. But what we don't see is that there are the classrooms that are not without teachers, but the reason being is that provinces try to manage their compensation of posts. Now, the report that we have, we talk of filling of posts, and these are posts for permanent appointments. And what provinces do in order to manage their budgets is either to, in certain instances, they just basically put in educators in terms of on contract appointment. And then you will realize as well around January, February, members do come to us to say that provinces are not paying these contract educators. They try to start paying them only in February. So accounting officers and CFOs try to manage it in that way, not probably the right thing to do and not the correct thing either in that regard. There's also at times where substitutes, we could not provide substitutes, especially when it was comorbidities as well. But as I indicated, because of the number of learners that did come back, it did not materialize to the extent that we wanted. So currently as well, there are complaints at certain times about provinces taking too long to fill posts. But if they don't fill the post, then they basically put a temporary educator in place because it tends to be cheaper. And at times, if there's a substitute that's needed, they have methods in which they look at with the circuits and how to deal with that. Also now with the EAs that have come on board, we are well aware that we've indicated, as the Honorable Tembekwaya indicated, they are not to replace educators. They are there to support and assist. And we do have that, like the example she gave, does happen, but it's not to a large extent. But that's what we do not want to happen. So This is something I think we can come to the committee and present in terms of a fuller picture, because I think one of the members also asked about specific questions to particular provinces, and we can share this information at the appropriate time. Thank you, Acting DG.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pariachi. The matter raised on the PGCE, I think it's Honorable Letsie. Mr. Pariachi?
I didn't get that one. Maybe we'll get the question and we'll provide it in writing.
Okay, no, that's fine. So, Chair, we'll then request Honorable Letsie to pass on that email that he's referring to, and Mr. Pariachi will respond to that as well. Can I then invite the CFO back, but with his branch A hat, to deal with issues of vacancies? The chairs refer to all these acting positions that we have. If you could clarify, CFO.
Thank you, Dr. Whitler. I missed the gist of the question. Maybe if I can be reminded, maybe that's when I was still writing.
Okay.
Question,
you did say that you were struggling initially, Pat. So let me try and repeat quickly. There was an issue around vacancies in the DBE. So we've referred to some of the curriculum as well as BI DDGs as acting. And so the chair just wanted an update on why those positions have not been filled.
Okay, no, thanks, Chair. At the end of we must remember that this report relates to the period up to March, at the end of March. So we have gone through a few interviews. We've filled some of the posts. For example, we've filled a few chief director and director positions. There's one chief director position which we have filled in your area, Dr. Whitler. I forget the title of the chief directorate. And there's another chief director that we have filled in Ms. Gaya's unit. So we fill in these posts. We advertise in some of the posts, but some have to go through re-adverts. For example, one of the DDG positions that became vacant, which we have already interviewed for, is Dr. Maboya's position. That's why you have, I think it's a DDG branch C. So that interview has already taken place. We've also interviewed for the post of DDG in the DG's office, but we could not find a suitable candidate. As a result, there has been a re-advert, and I think maybe some of you may have seen the re-advert in the weekend's papers. So we're moving along and filling these posts as we go along. Chap speed that one would have liked it to happen, but we are filling the posts. In the last in finance, for example, in my branch, in the last 4 weeks, we have interviewed for 2 director positions. So we're trudging along. It may actually not be at the speed that is required. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the update, CFO. Chairperson, we'll try and move a bit faster. Dr. Similani, there was a question on why the Elspeth KZN fourth quarter transfer didn't happen. And there were also questions around support for disabled learners. I'm not sure if you were in at that point, but if you could deal with those. Chairperson, it looks like we've lost Dr. Simelane. Dr. Polia, I'm not sure if you're in. So it looks like we've lost both of them, Chair. It looks like on those items, unless CFO, you were able to deal with the Elspeth grant for KZN.
Chair, that's the one where there was a non-compliance where we withheld the last tranche. What happened was that subsequent to the underspending or the non-transfer, the KZN department did apply for a rollover, which we then applied for at Treasury, and we did get that rollover. And subsequently, we have seen an improvement in their compliance. There are still challenges here and there. I'm not sure that, Chair, I'm answering the question. I think as one writes, one concentrates more on the questions that relate to one. So I may be off target, but on that under transfer to KZN, they have since made good. And I must just indicate, Chair, for the benefit of the committee, that the transfers of the conditional grant monies to provinces is done in terms of the Division of Revenue Act. And we have 4 tranches. We transfer one per quarter, once per quarter. And then we do monitoring within the DBE as to whether, among other things, the funds are being used for the purposes that they are intended. We also make sure that there's a regular reporting on the usage of the funds. And in cases where there's non-compliance, especially to reporting requirements, the DORA empowers us to alert the department, the province, to say, look, you're not complying, please submit your report within such and such a date. And then if that still fails, we are then empowered to withhold the funds for a period, maybe 30 days, and then later on withhold it for good. So it so happens that if the non-compliance happened in the middle of the year, during the year, it's easy for it to be, the non-compliance, it to be made good, such that by the end of the year, all the tranches would have been transferred. But if the non-compliance happened in the last quarter of the year, it makes it so much more difficult because there's not much year left to play with. That's why you find that if it's a non-compliance at the end of the quarter of the year, by the time the province complies, the year has ended and the money has not been transferred or spent. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CFO. Chairperson, on this one, we will find the exact reasons for why this particular 4th transfer was delayed, and we will communicate that back in writing to the committee. Can I then ask Ms. Geyer to deal with the issues on the principles matter raised by Honorable Nodada, and perhaps also deal with the monitoring of underperforming schools raised by Honorable Letsie. Ms. Geyer?
Thank you very much, Acting DG, and good evening to the Honourable Chairperson and the Honourable members in the House. So the question around, the dissatisfied principals and where they're located and the reasons for the lack of support and what interventions are made. So how we arrive at the 17.8% of dissatisfied principals is based on the survey that's done. And that information then gives us exactly where they are located, so we can provide the information of the districts where they are located. We can also give you the reasons for the lack of the support, because the survey goes into the detail of that. And based on that survey, we then put in place interventions that need to be made in each of the districts where they are located. So much of the dissatisfaction it varies from year to year, because we do this survey all the time. But currently, the dissatisfaction is around the extent to which the principals feel supported by the circuit managers who come to the school and the subject advisors. So the complaints are that there are not sufficient subject advisors in subject specialized areas. And I think it goes back to the vacancy issue, which was raised earlier on, around having sufficient people to go and to provide the support that is required. And in the case of the circuit managers, it's about the scope of work and the number of schools that they are able to visit in a radius, and where the provinces have not actually aligned the district policy to make educational sense. Circuit managers still struggle to then, on a monthly basis go and attend to the school. So if you've got 300 schools, you have to go and visit. You can see that there's a problem in terms of how you're going to get there and really give a good service. Whereas if you only got 20 schools, you can give greater service. So it's about how we continue to align the municipal boundaries of what the policy talks to make educational sense to be manageable, so that the circuit managers can actually do that work. And those interventions are put in place, and the discussions with the provinces happen to see exactly how we can do that going forward. It's an annual thing, and it differs from year to year based on the issues that are raised and then the interventions that are put in place. Then in relation to the issue around underperforming schools or poor performing schools, and the extent to which that is monitored, and how we can actually ensure that there's better consequence management for what goes wrong around poor performing schools. So again, there are a number of reports and monitoring that we do throughout the year. And in particular, in this instance of poor performing schools, the examination results are analyzed, both the matric exam results, as well as in that result of the matrics, we go into detail, zooming in per subject of exactly what the poor performance is per subject, per district, per school within the district. But then we also look at the other results as well, because that gives us very clear indicators of the extent to which we need to put in place measures to support the schools. So what we then do around the poor performing schools is that although located within, we have in our results, we have an analysis that talks to districts that are poor performing, because within those poor performing districts, you will find the poor performing schools. And there we have put in place a mentorship program at a national level. There are 3 provinces that are in the worst categories of poor performing districts. They are Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Northern Cape. And we have put in place a mentorship program in those specific districts with the aim of bringing them up to the standard that is required to meet the threshold of what takes you out of being a poor performing school. Of course, or a poor performing district. Of course, as the results improve and the performance of the districts and schools improve, the benchmark and the standard is increased. But in this instance, for now, we have these 3 provinces, and there are quite a few mentors that we have appointed, for instance, in Eastern Cape and Limpopo. And their task is then to work with the districts, to work with all the officials in the districts around clearly identified interventions that will ensure that we bring that district up in terms of its performance, around how they're preparing the teachers to teach, how they are preparing the district around various administration areas, and how they're preparing principals to ensure that they become good leaders and help to manage the performance of their schools. And also they bring in specific interventions for the circuit, for the subject advisory service to assist in terms of specific subject areas where they pick up, what the difficulties are there. So those for now are the interventions that we have. Over time, what goes with that is the various other interventions and support programs that we do overall in trying to help in the improving the learner performance within the system. And so there are a number of other measures there that have helped, especially over the COVID period, issues like how we have tried to utilize the Woza Matric program, how we have tried to introduce programs within across the system that help, through TV and radio and video recordings, and looking at various platforms of Moodle where we have introduced learning materials as well as hard copy materials to support the intervention. So all of that is added on top of the issue around the mentorship program to help. And I think that as we track and monitor, the purpose is to ensure that there's improvement. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaya. Chairperson, the second but last area, I'm going to ask Ms. Nuga Deliwe and Mr. Mpanza if they want to respond to the issue raised in terms of how we set targets. And if Ms. Nuga in particular could also deal with the status of research within the department, which is one of the areas raised by Honorable Soekers. So maybe we take you first, Carol, and then we go to Becky. Carol?
Thank you very much. We'll go backwards, I think. Maybe it's easier. I think Honorable Soekers is... just want to thank Honorable Soekers for the question, but also to indicate that there are different sorts of research across the different sections of the department. So the policy programs, the national department, as we had indicated, leads policy, and policy research is part of the policy process, reviewing the policy process, but also refining it and monitoring how effective it is. And one can do that at the level of a program, in which case the policy programs and the program owners, the policy owners, the responsible line function would do that as a matter of developing their problem analysis, developing the policy and what it's addressing, but also monitoring and refining that policy. Over and above that, there's a research coordination, monitoring and evaluation unit, which looks at the research that supports medium to long-term outcomes, planning, and monitoring and tracking. They're quite different, but they're related. And so that research process within the department is run within the programs, but it's also run across in terms of the sector outcomes in the research coordination, monitoring and evaluation unit. The NIDU unit, which is the unit that deals with education development, also does some research that relates to school level and also district level, the value chain from school to district into system. So at that lower end of the system, and they bring to really focus on those issues that affect quality improvement at school, classroom level. So there are different sorts of research. The coordination of some of that research, when we are aware of it and when the department is aware of it, sits in the research coordination unit, but it's also the responsibility of policy owners to do research and to commission, and obviously with guidance from the research unit, but to commission research in their own specialist area. So you're quite right in terms of just research capacity and the need to do that research capacity. Of course, government can't do research capacity on its own, and we rely on partners to do research with us. We also have a lot of intergovernmental arrangements and partnerships around research inputs, and a lot of NGOs, but other state entities, Human Sciences Research Council, for instance, do research that is related to some of the work that we do. And we actively promote those kinds of partnerships with academic institutions, etc. So I know that, for instance, in Branch S, I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of work around with other stakeholders around research interests on social cohesion, on inclusion, etc. Issues that are done by, for instance, the Human Rights Council and other agencies that are of mutual benefit in terms of realizing socioeconomic rights. The second thing I wanted to address from the honorable member was about target setting. I think this is a conversation that we have almost every year around how targets are set, depending on what targets they are and what the function of the national department is. We are able to, within the context of the NDP, which is medium to long term, address developmental targets of the country, but also try to domesticate those within the sector through the action plan. So we have a sector plan that looks at the trajectory of, say, for instance, reading competency as indicated in learning assessments over a period of time since 1990, and begins to point to areas where it's possible to get to, and areas where we would want to be going in relation to growth in reading competency, in maths competency, the numbers and percentage of bachelor passes, etc. So some of those targets are related to where we were before, the growth and the growth possibilities. Even the learning outcome targets we have are related to that. But however, over and above those targets, there are some targets which we know we have to deal with in relation to just the need. And a lot of those targets are in relation to infrastructure. And a lot of those targets for the DBE and the 9 provincial departments are really embodied in the sector outcomes and how those 9 provinces as implementing arms, as well as the national department, work together to get to where we want to go in terms of the sector over a 5, 10, 15-year period. And so the targets that we have within our APP are combinations of that, but based on the national department's function and that national department's growth trajectory and expectations. What we are doing is also doing some analysis of previous targets and how we've done over time. And we're going to be, over the next 2 months, presenting that within the department. And we can also bring that information into with the honorable members at Portfolio Committee. But that's basically how we do it through a fairly scientifically informed, evidence-based process. And this is the approach in most cases: the capacity, the resources allocated, and the expectations in terms of growth over time. Thank you, honorable members and honorable chairperson and DG.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nugadeliwe. Mr. Mpanza, I'm not sure if you want to add anything. Okay, Chairperson, looks like we've lost Mr. Mpanza as well. So, Chair, I will then try and just conclude by addressing 1 or 2 issues. I think that we will await some of the detailed questions from Honourable Soekers and respond to them in detail. The one issue that she's raised, Chairperson, is around DBE consultation. I thought in the last meeting, DG Mweli took quite some time to explain the formal process as outlined in legislation. But he also added that, during the COVID period in particular, we consulted, often and widely. One of the issues, for example, that he raised was that the minister had initiated a forum coordinated by the NECT that brought together, I think, more than 250 civil society organizations that the minister, the DG, and the DM, prioritize in terms of meeting with them on a quarterly basis. I think under the COVID period it was even more than that. In addition to conversations with civil society, we met regularly with key stakeholders, including SGBs, the independent school sector, teacher unions, and these, often happened separately. For meetings coordinated by the DG, and then separate meetings coordinated by the ministry. But Chair, we would welcome those questions, and we will certainly respond to them. The last issue was the issue raised by Honorable Letsie around pregnancies. Chairperson, we were at the committee a month or so ago, and we made the point that what COVID proves is that, the point that we often make is that education is protective for children. And we can see that during the COVID period, there was a bump in the number of teen pregnancies. We do expect that we're going to have an increase in incidents for HIV, for STIs. And we also know, based on some of the reports that were produced during the course of the COVID period, that we had increased rates of abuse of GBV. And our president has referred to GBV, for example, as a second pandemic. And so we know that what we need to ensure is that we try and get children back to full-time school as soon as we can. And I think those are discussions, obviously, that are happening within the department, and that will happen with stakeholders, over the course of the next couple of months, to ensure that we can normalize schooling as soon as we can. Chairperson, I am sorry that we have taken so much time to respond, but quite a large number of questions from the committee. I now hand back to you, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Whittle and your team. I think you have adequately responded to all the issues that we have raised. Is there any member that feels that there is something that is not responded to? None?
All right. None.
All right. Okay. No, thank you very much. Then I think we are then at the end of our meeting. Thank you very much to the department, Dr. Whittle and your team. I know we overworked today. We worked almost 7 hours, which is the first and probably the last time that we are doing it. Our program was just forcing us to work these hours today. And I want to thank everybody for availing themselves to be part of these meetings, both of them, because I know we took much time, and there were issues of connectivity as well. So thank you very much, Siyabonga. And we are going to meet not next week. I know next week we've got FFC and AG. So that week we've got Umalusi and SACE. So yeah, we'll probably meet when we must meet. Thank you very much. Once more again, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Bye, donkey.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good night, everyone.
Llewellyn? Louis?
Hello.
Are you back?
Yeah, I've been back for quite a while. I just missed out on just maybe 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Responses.
but I think I've got the majority of the information.
They are recorded, no?
Yeah, I've recorded as well.
Okay, fine. Switch it off then.
I've stopped my recording, but I haven't been able to record that 5 minutes that I was out.
I'm getting out now. Okay.
All right. Thanks for everything. Keep well. Bye-bye. Thanks, Portia, for co-hosting.